most special things about what we do in the lecture series is our ability to bring eyewitnesses to you. And Paul often comes to talk. He hasn't been here in a couple of years. But today we're going to hear from Paul Schwarzbart. He has a very unique story, and yet in its being unique, it also is a story that many people experienced, but his is his own and unique. We're going to start out with showing a DVD of an Emmy Award-winning video that was made about Paul's life. Then we'll have some questions and answers. I encourage you to think of what you'd like to ask Paul as things go on. Briefly, by way of introduction, he is actively involved now, even though he's retired, in many, many organizations. Paul was a French teacher for how many years, Paul? 45. 45 years. Are there any French speakers here? Nick gets to speak French.
One? Right here. That's it?
Nick, that's all. Another one? Where? Oh, bon. I'm a pretender. In any case, I know that also Paul has written his autobiography called Breaking the Silence, and we have some copies here that are available for inscription and also for purchase. So, for $20, one bill, $20 bill. So let's start with the DVD. 2 for $35? Yeah, Paul's going to introduce the DVD and tell you about the production of it. And I remember seeing it on TV.
Thank you. Hi, I can either do this or stand on tippy toes. I'm used to both. Thank you very much. No, the DVD was made, the film rather, the DVD was made by me, but the film was made by KRON in San Francisco on old tape, but I transferred it to DVD because it's a lot easier to show it that way. The film was made in 1988, which to some of you may sound like the Middle Ages or beyond. And it was done because I had been asked to go back to Europe, and you will see that in the film, so I don't want to say too much about it. And KRON heard about this trip and asked me whether I would allow them to accompany me. And since the thing was a public event, I said, well, it's not for me to say yes or no, but you do as you please. And so I met the crew at the airport, and then they dogged my every step while I was in Europe. My only safe place was the toilet. And I'm not even sure. But otherwise, they were with me all the time, and then what you're about to see is the result. They shot for, I forget how many hours. How many hours? Well, hours upon hours upon hours upon hours, which they then, those of you who are in film will understand. After that, they edited it for several months in San Francisco on Van Ness to get it down to about 52 minutes, which by itself to me is a tour de force, to be able to do that. And the film got 3 Emmys, so it's really a very well-made piece, and I happen to be in it, rather than the other way around. The version that you are going to see was re-edited in 1997. I will still look the same, but they added a new narrator, and they cleaned up some of the color, they tell me, and things of that nature. It's always amazing to me when a commercial station will go to that expense for something that is non-commercial. So, my level of respect for them went way up since I did this twice. So, as was said, afterwards, any nasty question you want to ask, I'll defer to my wife. Thank you.
You okay?
Many of my fellow children, many did not escape and were brutally put to death or tortured. It is beyond imagination.
We, the German Chancellor and the British Prime Minister, have had a further meeting today. We regard the agreement signed last night as symbolic of the desire of our two peoples never to go to war with one another again.
I know that it happened. I know that I was involved in it. I know that I had to go into hiding to escape. I prayed very hard for my parents, my mother and my father, the teachers and the other children. I prayed that none of us would have to die or be hurt before it was over.
World War II, and Europe was filled with rage and madness and killing. But in the Ardennes forest of Belgium, there was a place of refuge. Tucked away in the small village of Gemoigne was the children's home of Queen Elizabeth. Here, sanctuary was offered to 83 Jewish boys. Sanctuary from the persecution of Adolf Hitler's Nazi Germany and the evil of the final solution. Four decades later, in the spring of 1988, the children returned to a reunion, men in midlife with their families and friends, to greet and embrace each other, and the people who were their saviors. This is the story of one of the children who was saved, Paul Schwarzbart of San Rafael, California, teacher, father, survivor, Jew. All that he is was shaped by what happened 50 years ago to a frightened little boy when hell opened up and claimed him.
And I can only forgive things that were done to me. I can never forgive what was done to my father and to the rest of my family. Only they can forgive that. I cannot.
March 13, 1938, Vienna, once the capital of an empire of kings and queens. This historic city is now the center of the Anschluss, the Nazi annexation of Austria, and where Adolf Hitler returns in triumph to the land of his birth. It was here as a young man that he suffered humiliation and failure as a would-be artist, and where he began to nurse his hatred for the Jews. It is also 1 month before the 5th birthday of Paul Schwarzbart, the only child of Friedrich and Sarah Schwarzbart. Austria is the land of their birth in a Jewish family heritage which dates to the 1700s. They had prospered in a country where 200,000 Jews not only made their home, but helped to define the culture. The Schwarzbart family is as much Austrian as it was Jewish. Both of Paul's grandfathers died fighting for Austria in World War I. Now, if Hitler can have his way, the 1,000-year tradition of Austria's Jews is to be obliterated from history.
One morning, my parents were standing at the window looking rather shook up, and I remember going to the window, looking out and seeing this strange, huge flag, a red flag with a white circle and a strange looking cross in the middle. So overnight, the Austrian flag had been taken down and the Nazi German flag had been put up with a swastika. And this is how quickly it happened.
In Austria's new Nazi regime, the Jews are an enemy of the state. Paul's father had his job taken away, and the family apartment was confiscated and given to a Nazi family. Austria, the land of Strauss and the waltz, is now a land of violence and intimidation, even for children.
Children I'd grown up with, good friends, all of a sudden were wearing the button with a swastika and their lapels and telling me, dirty little Jew, to get off the sidewalk and walk in the gutter where I belonged.
The sound of breaking glass gave the name to the night of November 9th and 10th, 1938. Crystal Night, the rampage of terror and destruction directed against the Jews in every corner of Germany and Austria. The Nazi brown shirts were avenging the death of a German diplomat killed by a Jew. When the rampage had ended, the cold November sun revealed over 7,000 Jewish homes and businesses plundered, 300 synagogues put to the torch, close to 100 Jews killed, and 20,000 arrested and deported to concentration camps. In the last days of 1938, as many Jews before them were forced to do, the Schwarzbarts and other family relatives fled their homes, leaving behind everything they once cherished, leaving Austria forever.
All because we were Jews.
In late winter of 1938, the Schwarzbarts smuggled themselves out of Austria through Germany and into Belgium. They are in search of visas for the United States. They find a small apartment in Brussels. It is a Jewish neighborhood, and life is hard.
I remember next door there was a woman who sold, down below the next door, she sold coal and vegetables. And occasionally she would sell my mother some rutabaga or potatoes, or sometimes the leftovers from it, whatever my mother could afford to pay for, but she always managed to cook it. I have disliked rutabaga ever since. I don't think I want to look another one in the face, but it kept us alive.
Again and again, Paul's father calls on the American embassy, but the visas never seem to come. Refugees are not able to obtain work permits, but Paul's mother finds illegal work as a housekeeper. As a result, Paul and his father spend many days together. Neither would know just how precious their time together would be. World War II begins in September of 1939. Poland is invaded, and as Hitler's armies rage on, a young boy and his parents in Brussels try as best they can to lead normal lives. The closeness between a father and son grows stronger.
I remember an enormous love for me, and which I returned. I remember an enormous love for my mother, which set a marvelous example for me both as husband and father. And this is really what is foremost in my memory.
Now, almost a half-century later, in the same Brussels neighborhood, other memories of a past filled with joy and regret are resurrected. The family home in a corner apartment building. Paul, now 55, has not entered this place since his childhood days.
The little apartment that we rented in 39, it was a walk up on the 3rd floor. I feel like an intruder. Okay, here's the 3rd floor. This was it. Looks unoccupied. This was our kitchen. This was our bedroom. It looks unoccupied. looks like a storage space. Is that really how small it was? This door either did not exist, don't remember. If it did exist, it was not one that opened, because this is all there was. My bed was here. There was a stove here. My mother's bed was right here. I always thought it was a large room. It's not a large room. This was our little kitchen. My God, it's small. Stove stood right here. There was, of course, no sink, no water connection. We had to get in the toilet to get the water. There was a large table there. My mother had made curtains for it, so that was a storage space underneath. There were no cupboards of any sort. And that's all. That was the kitchen. Good times up here. Yeah. Wonderful family times up here. I never knew it was small, that we were poor or anything like that. Never really felt that. Good times. A lot of love. You sure don't need much to be happy.
In the same September month of the Nazi Blitzkrieg in Poland, Paul Schwarzbart begins the first grade. He is 6 years old.
This is the school where I met Joseph Campé, a wonderful man, my first year teacher, who really taught me French. And then when the Germans said that Jews could no longer go to school, he retired. He would not, if he couldn't teach everyone, he wouldn't teach. Every morning on his way to school, he would drop off a pack of sandwiches for me at the house. So I would eat lunch, and so I would eat. And he did that every day. Just a stranger, my teacher.
This was a good place. Still looks like a good place. Kids learning.
Friday, May the 10th, 1940. The German army invades Holland, Luxembourg, and Belgium. Disregarding the 3-year-old pact of neutrality, Hitler's swift attack infantry and panzer divisions overwhelm the Belgians. On the same day their country is invaded, Belgian authorities begin a roundup of German-speaking refugees. They are seen as potential spies, possible Nazi collaborators. Tragic and ironic, most are Jews running from the Nazis. In the roundup, which lasts 3 days, upwards of 10,000 are seized. Paul's father was among them.
Well, we were on the 3rd floor in our bedroom, and someone knocked at the door, and there was uniformed Belgian police with the white helmets and a civilian. And they had papers, and they asked for Friedrich Schwarzbart, and they said that because of the war situation, he, being Austrian, he had to accompany them. It was very simple. It was not unfriendly. It was very matter-of-fact. And my mother was beside herself. I didn't know what to do. And they said that we could come down to the police station and bring some things to him. And off they went. This is what it brought the people on the 10th of May, the Germans, the Austrians, all the people of German origin, most of whom were Jews, but they didn't care. They stuck them in here, and then they were locked up in this tiny little courtyard, bunches at a time. I still see them all standing there, huddled together. Everybody trying to be optimistic and wishing their wives or whomever, well, they'd be all right. And so my mother and I brought a bundle of clothes here and got it through the grill work, and this is the last place I saw my father. Yeah, right behind us here, just sticking his hand out, reaching for us. It's a dismal place. It was dismal then, it's even worse now. He told me to take good care of my mother, that he would be back, but that I was a man of the family now, and that I had to take care of Mutti. And neither one of us knew that this was the last time.
The very day of his father's arrest, on the way home from their goodbye, Paul and his mother meet a woman whose family would become their good Samaritans.
My mother went into a Red Cross station to find out if there was anything else we could do for my father, if we could find out where he was being sent and so forth. And as fate will have it, we spoke to a woman named Andre Eckstein. I think she just reacted to the way my mother and I looked. And took pity on us, and I mean, as a human being in need of solace and help, and she willingly extended her hand.
Andre Eckstein, realizing the Schwarzbarts are alone and destitute, offers Paul's mother a job working in the Eckstein home, taking care of their children. The husband, George, is an architect. For the next 3 years, Paul spends a great deal of time in their house, and a relationship develops into something much deeper.
They were not Jews, these people who helped us were not Jews, which allowed them a certain amount of freedom that we didn't have, but also linked them very closely with us, and they would have certainly shared our faith if anything had happened to us.
Belgium surrenders 3 weeks after the Nazi invasion, and life for the country's 90,000 Jews becomes even more uncertain and dangerous. In the apartment next to the Schwarzbarts lives a woman who entertains the troops.
Which in this case meant Germans and even SS in their black uniforms. And which scared my mother very, very much. And yet we lived with it. I remember sometimes at night she would, the walls were rather thin, and she would put her hands over my ears to protect my innocence.
Then come the letters written by Paul's father. He is in the mountains of southwest France at labor camps where the Belgian authorities have sent him.
Darling, give special kisses to my child.
The first letter is dated June 26, 1940, soon after France falls to the Germans. More letters follow when the family writes back. The Germans censored the letters, but let them go through as proof of their so-called humanity. What survives are Friedrich Schwarzbart's expressions of hope and love for his family. This is what he writes Paul.
You are my everything, my sunshine, as well as your mother's and the whole family's. I'd like to hold you fast, to love you, tell jokes with you, but also unfortunately that is not possible because I'm here. But your picture I carry in my heart, And my thoughts are ever with you.
And there are words of love from husband to wife, words of love between a man and a woman.
This is a poem he wrote my mother on the occasion of their 10th wedding anniversary. October 25th, 1941. Around me, woods and meadows, and lush green mountains blooming in the sunlight. Everything so peaceful. And then God's wonder. And yet, much, much more beautiful than all of this are you. I should so much like to love you, kiss your eyes, your hands, your mouth so red, and find it so bitter to have to miss being near you.
By the summer of 1942, the Nazis are after every Jew. At first, a deportation quota of 10,000 is established. Jews are told they are needed for work in the East, but then come the street arrests and roundups. Sent to transit camps, the Jews are often beaten and tortured and put on trains bound for Auschwitz. The first group of Jews leaves on September 2nd. Within a month, all 10,000 are deported. For 2 years, Paul's father suffers in the labor camps of France, where 3,000 prisoners die from brutality, starvation, and disease. Stopping short of extermination, the cruelty of the collaborating Vichy government comes close to that of the Nazis. In August of 1942, even that fragile distinction ends. At Germany's demand, the French hand over the remaining prisoners for deportation to death camps in the East.
August 24th, 1942. Dearest city, dearest Paulinka, I found myself going through the train station in Lyon and take the opportunity to send you my warmest greetings and kisses and utmost. At the first possibility, I shall immediately write again. Stay in good health. God will help. With all my love, your Papa Fritz.
Paul's father never writes again. His 99th letter, his last. There are no letters from his next destination, Gross Rosen, or the one after that, Buchenwald.
My mother often wondered why nothing happened to us, but I think that she simply accepted it. That's really how life was in those days. The person next to you was arrested and you kept on walking. Someone on the street was shot and you were not. And one was just grateful to be alive no matter how tough it was. And of course it started to get tough really in 42 and 43, and that's when the underground approached my mother and asked her whether she wanted to save my life, which was an interesting question to ask a mother. And if she did want to save my life, she'd have to simply give me up.
Paul's mother, now seeing the Nazis rounding up old people and children, talks to the Ecksteins about the choice she must make. When the stranger from the underground returns that night, she has her answer.
When she was handed that lifeline for me, I think she grabbed it. It seems to me that she had been probably agonizing over the problem of finding a solution of what to do with me, how to save me.
Paul is to leave this night. The Ecksteins offer him the use of their family name. The destination is secret. Not even his mother is told.
And she got a bundle of clothes together for me. Some good shoes, and some warm underwear. And the man came and she said yes. And we kissed goodbye. It wasn't quite so simple, but... And off I went into the night with this man holding me by the hand. and he took me to the train station, the Luxembourg, and he put me on a train and told me where I was going, and told me to take care of myself, which meant, remember, you're not Jewish. And then he walked away, and I never saw him again. And a few hours later, I ended up in the Ardennes, a little village of Jamogne.
It is May 13th, 1943. Paul Schwarzbart, now Paul Eckstein, does not know whether he will ever see his mother again. He is 10 years old.
And now that I am a father, I'm beginning to understand what she must have gone through to say yes to letting her son walk away in the night, not knowing whether she would ever see him again. It must have torn her heart out.
Located on the Samoa River, Jamogne is a farming village of about 1,000 people during World War II, and it is during the war that this 19th century chateau becomes a shelter for the needy children of Belgian soldiers. Named for the Queen Mother of Belgium, Queen Elizabeth, the chateau now becomes a place of secret refuge for Jewish children, a special place in the life of 10-year-old Paul Schwarzbart.
I arrived in Germany in the morning and then I was picked up. Hadn't thought about that for years.
The Jewish boys aged 5 to 14 begin arriving in March of 1943. They are overseen by 30 teachers and monitors and by a handful of nuns from the Order of the Sisters of Charity.
In the morning, we would be having classes with these various teachers who tried to maintain our education, and in the afternoon we played. We went out in the woods as scouts, and we built our huts, and we had our scouting games.
They all learned about getting along, about living with other human beings. Paul becomes a Cub Scout leader.
There I was, proud as can be, probably the shortest among them. Along with Paul Joris, my mentor, and walking almost side by side with him, I remember always gave me such a good and proud feeling.
With Paul's father lost to him, 23-year-old Paul Joris becomes one of the most important people in young Paul's life.
He said that when I arrived there, I seemed lost and very sad, and he talked to me, and it just clicked. And that one person extending his hand to me, I think made all the difference. It made some of the loneliness disappear, some of the fear. I have an enormous love for that man.
The home is administered by Emile Taquet, a retired Belgian army officer, and his wife Marie, a couple with no children of their own.
Every night she would tuck every and each boy in his bed and kiss him goodnight. And I remember how we waited for Maman Taquet to come out. We wouldn't go to sleep if she were detained until she had kissed us goodnight.
The chateau is in a remote corner of the Ardennes forest. German troops are a constant threat. Other safe houses in Belgium are discovered and their children and benefactors arrested and sent to death camps. One early morning in July of 1943, truckloads of Nazis with machine guns pull up to the chateau and begin to search its rooms and hallways.
I was so frightened that I wet my bed. We were on thin straw cots. This went right through and dripped onto the floor, where it was audible. And I remember two of the German soldiers hearing it and looking under the bed, and then one laughing in the other and saying, this kid just peed in his pants. And they thought very good-naturedly, this was very funny. All they had to do was throw back the covers and it would have been the end of fun.
One of the monitors, the one nicknamed Mouton, is taken, presumably to his death. But by some unexplained miracle, the boys are spared. Hiding at the chateau means that Paul must take on a Catholic identity. All the Jewish boys do. Paul is baptized. He takes Holy Communion. He even becomes an altar boy.
And believe it or not, I was a very good altar boy, because this was not an act for me. For any of us, I think. You know, we lived what we did. And the Our Father and the Hail Mary were learned, you know, in one session as I listened to everyone repeating them, because we had to utter these prayers constantly. We had to say grace. And I became a very good Catholic, which I suppose is being a good Jew, since Jesus was a Jew.
As the months pass into the next year, Paul falls into a routine for some semblance of tranquility. The home becomes a place of beauty and warmth.
And there is nothing in these walls associated with sadness, whatever may have torn us up inside it, nothing to do with this place. And so as I look at these walls, I just feel peaceful.
A landing was made this morning on the coast of France by troops of the Allied Expeditionary Force. The hour of their liberation was approaching.
By September of 1944, the Allies are in the process of pushing the Germans back to their own borders. The afternoon of the 8th, soldiers from the American 28th Infantry Division encountered German troops in Jawani. The skirmish extends to the grounds of the chateau.
There, my friends and I stood out there with bullets literally whistling by and shells exploding, too dumb to take shelter, not really caring about it. And I think even the teachers, the monitors, were just as much in awe of what was happening and were watching with us and forgot to tell us to get back in. And here came the jeeps with their antennas, which we thought were fishing poles, and the boys got out and stood out in the open, shooting back.
By late afternoon, the encounter is over. The Americans move the Germans into further retreat. The village of Jemwania is liberated. So is the children's home of Elizabeth. All 83 Jewish boys survive.
For what it did for us, it was an immense fortress. A refuge, place of learning, place to grow up.
Now 11 and a half, Paul receives permission from Madame Tequet to leave the chateau. On October 30th, he says goodbye, and with hope, his only companion, sets out for the old Brussels neighborhood in search of his mother.
She always said that she did not want to give up this apartment because that was the one place where my father knew that he could find her, and I too, after I went away, I would come back to that. And that's why she said she stayed, but she lived in fear throughout the war every minute.
On a familiar street, hope becomes reality. After almost 2 years, Paul finds once again the soft embrace of his mother.
When I saw my mother at a distance, I recognized her, of course, immediately, and she, me, and we start running toward each other, almost like in a movie. And I was calling out Mutti, which is what I called her. And one of the first things I said to her was, "Oh God," in broken German, "I was so homesick for you." And we just hugged. One of the things she said to me was that, and now we can wait for Papa's return together. So we started waiting and inquiring, filling out forms, trying to find out where he was and when he would be coming home.
There were 2 rows of bodies stacked up like forklifts. They were thin and very white. Murder had been done at Buchenwald. God alone knows how many men and boys have died there during the last 12 years.
The journey of father ends in the concentration camp of Buchenwald, where Nazi cruelty survives even while its army crumbles. It is here where Friedrich Schwarzbart dies. There is an epilogue to the story of Friedrich Schwarzbart, and it is found here in the Brussels office of the Belgian Ministry of Justice, in a series of rooms, row upon row of Nazi records, itemized ledgers of the cold arithmetic of life and death.
These are all the Jews who were deported out of Belgium.
Paul comes here out of curiosity, looking for his personal history in the code books of the underground, but records keeper Claire Boret helps him discover other information. Since 1960, Paul has known for certain that his father is dead, but it is only here and now that he learns how he died.
Here's my father. He entered Buchenwald on the 10th of February 45, coming from the camp of Gross Rosen, with his number 124951, and that he died there 1 week or 8 days later. It says died, I always wonder why they don't say murdered. This is so chilling that there are just no words for it. I know all these things exist, but to see your own father's life. Little slips of paper from German registers, you know. Has all the information, incredible. Oh my God. That's how I remember him. Told us, Marshal, dear Lord, he was part of the death march. Perhaps it says that both his feet were frozen, and perhaps sepsis means that he developed blood poisoning or something like that.
The cold arithmetic of life and death. Friedrich Schwarzbart, tattoo number 124951, died of blood poisoning early on a Sunday morning. It was February the 18th, 1945, less than 2 months before the camp's liberation. He was 42 years old.
Is there ever a time when I don't think about my father? No, there really isn't. I think about him very, very, very often. He's always with me. You know, this was a big battlefield.
More than 4 decades later, the chateau is alive with familiar voices again.
Oh, God.
Paul and the others have returned to remember.
Come a long way for this.
On this warm Sunday afternoon in the Ardennes, they have come from their homes across Europe and America. With loved ones, 44 of the boys return for a reunion. For many, including Paul, it is the first time they've seen each other since their childhood days.
These are human beings that, even though we have not seen for the most part another for 45 years, we walk up and time means absolutely nothing. You embrace one another, you kiss, and the glow is so profound and so special.
His beloved teacher, Paul Jaurès, is here. Now 67 years old, he is a professor in Brussels.
Oh, Paul. Oui, les derrière toi, il est en train de te prendre.
Madame Taquet, now 87 and a widow.
On veut encore te prendre. Tourne un peu la tête vers ta gauche.
And here is Mouton, the monitor who was taken away by the Nazis. The boys all thought he was killed, but he is alive, and he is here. They all return to see each other and hear words that acknowledge the purpose of this day, words that bring back the sacrifice and fear and death.
C'est à travers les mailles de ce filet que la résistance belge.
David Inoloki, who organized the reunion, first entered the chateau on his 5th birthday. He says returning today is like finding a family he had lost.
And there's no no border, no difference between those boys. We are all the same. Little boys saved. They have grown up now.
One of the people who saved the little boys is 66-year-old Andrei Hrscovici, a Brussels school teacher in 1942. She became alarmed as her Jewish pupils vanished one by one during the Nazi deportations.
Je me rendais pas compte, au départ, je me rendais pas compte pourquoi.
I would ask why they were missing, and they told me they were taken away last night by the Germans. They went to a camp. And then I told myself it was impossible. We cannot stay like this doing nothing.
Others shared her feelings. In the same year, the Jewish Defense Committee was established to save Jews from extermination. The committee contacted authorities in the Belgian government who were sympathetic. They agreed to help provide secret havens, like the children's home of Queen Elizabeth. André joined the effort, and through the Belgian underground began the dangerous job of shepherding children.
Et c'était dramatique.
And it was very dramatic when I left with a child, and the mothers were begging me and kissing me and were asking me, tell me where the child is going to go. And I said, no. Afterwards, when I was in the street, I cried, but at the time it was hard for the mothers, and many of these mothers never saw their children again. That's what you should know.
The children of Jamoigna on this day also came to honor those who helped save them. They are called righteous Gentiles, non-Jews who saved Jews during the war. Israel's ambassador to Belgium presents diplomas and medals to 31 adults who saved the 83 Jewish boys from the Nazis. Madame Taquet is among those honored. Paul Jaurès is also recognized, the man young Paul so admired and respected that he too became a teacher. After the ceremony, mentor and student talk about the past.
Paul remembers when I arrived in Jamoigna.
With new shoes. You had new shoes, and it was very difficult for you to walk. Do you remember?
I remember that because, you know, Mommy had to equip me for going away forever. Yes. So I had good shoes on. We became good friends. Yes. And then you became my godfather. In the true sense of the word.
He was not a rational boy. I had some pupils in my classroom who were very clever too, but who only worked with their heads. And Paul had also a very big heart. You understand what I mean? That was Paul. And because he had a very big heart, his eyes reflected what happened in his heart and in his body.
On the way to the banquet, Paul met another dear old friend, 73-year-old Father René Ardet, the priest who made Paul an altar boy.
He was our father with a capital F, and he taught us catechism, and he taught us about values, and he taught us about dignity and how to become a human being that matters.
Father Ardet, now with cancer, was advised by doctors not to attend the reunion, but he came, he says, because doctors don't always understand about God. At the final event of the day, 250 people gather for an afternoon of informal celebration. Here in the church banquet hall, they'll share food and drink and complete their renewal with the past. They sing to remember the love of the grown-ups who saved them, as well as the comradeship of the other boys. They sing to declare their own survival. They sing to forget what they can never reclaim, the dreams that were shattered on the night of the broken glass. They sing to celebrate one small, undeniable, and singular triumph of good over evil, a conspiracy of love between men, women, and children, with two faiths, but one God.
It was a Christian prayer, and we sang this, thanking the Lord to give us food for that particular day. Yes, and we were thankful. It was a Christian prayer, that's all.
Nous aimerions porter un toast à la santé de Madame Taquet,
A renewal of the past. In this hall, Madame Taquet is surrounded by people she cared for and loved so many years ago. In all, she was responsible for 125 Christian and Jewish children. As a family, it had its normal problems. When the children arrived, they brought very little with them, so Madame Taquet had to make certain there was enough food, clothes, proper instruction. There was not much time to always worry about the Germans. Of Paul, she remembers a young boy who was always well-mannered and educated. Madame Taquet and her husband called him the Little Prince.
Sometimes I say to myself when I look at you, if the outcome had permitted, you would have been my child. You had nothing to worry about. Nothing would have happened to you.
Je m'appelais Jacques Labrec.
A renewal of the past. Men who had become doctors, artists, businessmen, husbands, and fathers stand together on a stage and declare with great pride their names, their real names they were forbidden to say while they were in hiding here.
Je m'appelais Paul Extin.
And Paul pays tribute to the family whose name he borrowed. Andre and George Eckstein are dead, but their 3 children remain close to Paul.
My feelings for all of them are total love and respect. They are indeed all members of my family in the deepest sense of the word.
As the hours grow short, they look to exchange a few more pictures, memories, details, to discover and to show how it all turned out. As though the past was close by, this afternoon of reunion allowed each of them to reaffirm the human capacity for love.
I still love my children the way I loved them at the time. Does a mother ever forget her children? I had adopted these children, and I kept this affection for them. And I would do for them now what I did back then.
I was at the same time very happy to see all that people, and at the same time I was a little sad because it's past is no more. Past is no more.
Little by little it became more and more emotional, and after a little while it was almost overwhelming. Because all the memories of those days and I kept seeing all of us as kids again. All for one, one for all.
So for one day they have been together again, and now that day is coming to a close. They tell each other we must meet again, and on this one day they have celebrated together what they have celebrated apart for the past 4 decades, their own survival. They have returned to the place and the people where that survival was secured. They have shown what they have made of that gift they were given here, a journey begun in fear and completed in triumph.
It's wonderful to be alive. It's wonderful to be alive.
Adolf Hitler's dream of a 1,000-year Reich ended in 12 years. Of the 6 million Jews who were murdered, 1.5 million were children. 15 of Paul's relatives were exterminated by the Nazis. Fulfilling a legacy offered in his youth, Paul has been a teacher for 32 years. He is also a proud husband and a father. His wife Gail is a concert violinist, and they are the parents of 2 sons, Mark 14 and David 13. A close, nurturing family, they continue the religion of his ancestors. In 1969, having remained faithful to her husband, Sarah Schwarzbart died.
to take a seat at the table and we'll entertain your questions.
I'll make my way over there. I may stumble.
They're going to look in your eyes to see what they, your heart.
You following that kid? He's a pretty neat little kid, I think. I really, you know, every time I see this, I'm just as proud of the kid that I used to be, that this little guy. He had a lot of guts.
Not that hard to flat.
Is there, oh.
Oh, okay. Whatever you say.
There we go. Okay. That way it'll be on the video.
Wow, technology.
Right. So, questions. Now we start with questions. I know that's pretty emotional. Yes? How did you get to the United States?
By ship. Just trying to relieve the tension. As the film showed, my mother and father made the decision to come to the United States in 1938. And unfortunately, the war preceded the papers coming through. So after the war, my mother reapplied. The waiting period in those days was 3 years. So at the end of 1948, we came to the States. Does that answer your question?
Where did you come straight to California?
Well, the ship went from Le Havre to New York, so I did get to see the lady in the harbor, which is everything they ever said that it is. It's an unforgettable moment. And then my mother wanted us to come to California for several reasons, one being the University of California. This is where she wanted me to get my education. She thought it was in San Francisco, because when you look at a world map, you know, that little separation between San Francisco and Berkeley does not show. And, but she insisted. My mother was a very clever lady. She insisted that we not come to California until we spoke English. And since neither she nor I knew any English, we worked very hard, day in and day out, reading every newspaper we could, trying to speak only English to each other. Takes some effort, but we did. I don't know where she got the money, but she managed to get a quarter almost every day for me to go to a movie. And of course, the movies are shown without subtitles, you know, so I had to pay attention to the English. And so after about 2.5 months, we felt pretty comfortable with English, and then we took a train and came to California and stayed.
What's a movie you remember?
The first movie that I saw in New York was Jimmy Stewart in The Rope. Do you remember? Has any one of you ever see it? He's the criminology professor whose students kill a third student and then invite him to dinner, and the table is the big basket or whatever, the box in which they have his body.
Oh.
I mean, it's almost ghoulish without being ghoulish, but throughout the evening, the dinner, so by the end of the evening, the professor has figured it out. This is supposedly based on a real case, but that was my first movie. So it was all conversation, no action, which makes it a lot tougher. When there's action, you can figure things out. Conversation is difficult. Right. But you realize from the movie how extraordinarily clever I am.
Yes?
How did you arrange for accommodation in New York?
I'm sorry.
How did you arrange for accommodation?
How did you make your arrangements to come to New York?
Where did you live?
Where?
Where did you live?
No, where did I live? Where?
How did you
In New York.
How did I find a place in New York? We stayed at a refugee hotel near Broadway, as I remember, and almost everybody there was a refugee, had come over, and there was an organization, I think it was the Joint, that paid for the rooms and gave us a daily allowance for food. That's why I never figured out where she got that quarter to send me to the movies. Seriously, but that was my mom. Or as I called her as a kid, Mutti.
Muti. Yes.
If you could choose one thing for each of us in the class to remember, what would that be about your experience?
About this experience. That there are more good people than evil people. And that when you give a person the chance to show their goodness, most often they will. And you realize the profession of most of the people who helped me in the film, mostly teachers. You know, and I never put that together like that, but after the film showed, my friends said to me, "No wonder you became a teacher. It was written." And I thought that was a fantastic compliment. My dear wife and I, she moved, she's over there now. Between us, we have 80 years of teaching prior to retirement. My wife retired after 35, and I after 45. And we're very proud of that baggage.
What did you teach here?
I taught French and English.
French and English as well.
And we loved it. We loved being teachers. Still doing it.
Does that bring up a question?
Hans has a question.
I wonder, how did your mother manage not to get picked up by the Nazis?
Oh, I thought it was going to be a less serious question. Thank you, Hans. Well, that question has puzzled us, of course. There was really no answer, because when you saw me in the archives, when I pulled out my father, she pulled out my father's file, but there was one file there that had all of us from Brussels, and my mother's file was absolutely up to date. Her name, everything else, including the address. The only thing that was wrong with that little card was that it also listed me as living there with her. And of course, I wasn't there, you know, when that card. But they could have picked her up like this any moment, and then just didn't. And it's really a question that does come up. Why? How are we to know why? One thing that comes to mind, I've thought about this a great deal, is maybe that woman next door who had that business of entertaining men, most of whom were soldiers, and so perhaps for that reason, not to embarrass them, maybe the building was off limits for anything. You know, that's, I don't know if, can you see why I would have arrived at that particular, because my mother told me, you know, that once or twice she would be coming up the stairs and a German officer would be coming down. Here she was with a big yellow star. And she remembers the one instance where the officer bowed to her without any hint of sarcasm and said, "Gnädige Frau," which is an appellation of great respect in German. Dear lady with a capital L, right? I can't translate it any other way. And she said she lost several days of life and he just moved on. I mean, he was finished, yeah? So he was on his way.
He was coming down
the stairs. So, you know, but he didn't have to be that polite, but he was. So, you know, I cannot really answer that question better than that, Hans. You know, it's amazing, isn't it? Because, you know, the building next door, across the street and diagonally across, those buildings were emptied of any Jews, you know, some of which, all three I witnessed. This happened before I went away. Okay, and the one that was diagonally across was a lot of family members. You should know that of these three buildings that I know personally, not one person returned. we were very naive, you know, after the war when my mother said, and now we can wait for Papa's return together, which, you know, is so hopeful. But we were so naive, we thought all of those people who had disappeared were now going to reappear. I mean, that made sense to us, you know. They were plucked away, now they'll be returned because it's all over. It did not happen that way. There are a couple of inaccuracies in the film, which always happens when somebody else writes a script. And they said that 15 members of my family were massacred. It was 66. You know, 66, because I went through everything and researched and sent all those sheets to the Yad Vashem, you know. That's the least I could do. But I always talk about my Papa. He's the one, this gorgeous, handsome, beautiful man. So, but I thought somebody was going to say, you know, 35 years of teaching and so forth, but I thought the film said your wife died, right? And she did, and for 4 years, I was in abject misery. I was sure life was over. And then this lady came into my life and resuscitated me. And we have been together now a little over 8 years, and as happy as two kids can be.
2 kids. Robert?
Paul, I think you mentioned that when you were at the school that you didn't know that any of the other boys were Jewish.
Oh, yes.
At what point did you discover that? At the reunion?
Before the reunion. You know, you understood? Right. Each one of us, I mean, I was sure I was the only Jew there, and I had to protect everybody else's safety by making sure they didn't discover that I was Jewish. And in 1988, I received this letter inviting me to a reunion of the Jewish boys at the school. I mean, you know, if somebody had picked up a baseball bat and hit me between the eyes, it couldn't have been a greater shock. And you know, my first reaction was, you know, sure, I'm going to go reunite with me. but you know, the letter was quite clear. It had two columns, 2 sets of names that I recognized, and other names except for one that I did not recognize. It said, you know, the one I recognized was Paul Eckstein, Paul Schwarzbart. And I realized that all these people, these were their real names, and you know, and I think the film said 83. The figure stands at 87 last time we really counted, which is phenomenal because there were 125 boys at the school, so over half. You know, Madame Taquet and her husband accepted over half the children as Jewish. I mean, can you fathom the risk that she took? You know, I mean, you can only die once, but she accepted death when she accepted the first one, I guess. You know, but she was putting all the others at risk too, as was the Eckstein family by giving me their name. If I'd been caught, all of them, they would also have died. So that is extraordinary. One point I'd like to mention in the same vein is that 3 of the boys had brothers. And we didn't even know that X and Y were brothers. You know, they kept that secret. And that's why it worked, you know. A secret only works if you keep it secret. I mean, the temptation for people to turn people over to the Germans was enormous. First, they didn't like Jews, and secondly, the rewards were great. So it didn't take much to get caught, you know, so luck. Sir?
Paul, you were a very good altar boy.
Yes, I really was.
How was the transition from being an active Catholic Church participant into, did you have the realization that this was like a suit of clothes that you could take off?
I've never thought of it that way. That's a beautiful image. Almost, you know. It was a role that I played, fully cognizant of the responsibility that this role entailed. I treated it with great respect. But it was not a matter of conversion. When I returned and saw my mother was not highly educated, but she was the cleverest person I think I ever met. You know, she had to go to work when she was pretty young, so I think after high school that was it. But she was highly educated. And the way she handled this whole problem of the two religions and what to do was that she didn't. The first Friday night came along, the first Sabbath came along, she blessed the candles, and I was back home. That was it. We never had discussions about it. Many years later, here in the United States, she said, "You remember that day when we saw each other on the street and started running toward each other?" I said, "Of course." And she said, "You know, the greatest joy of my life, I think, was seeing you. And then I noticed on your belt you were carrying a cross." And that was someone putting a knife through my heart. She never said a word till all those years later. You know, that cross was one of the prized possession, I'm sure, of one of the sisters at the school who gave it to me as a going away memento. She must have given me what she had most precious. You know, and I wore it on my belt, you know, when I got back to Brussels and saw my mother. She talked about it before she died, long, 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 long afterwards. Never made it a subject of confrontation or of hurt.
Lisa, did you have your hand up?
I was just going back to the school. I was wondering if the teachers or the monitors, if they knew about your true identity, because it's just amazing to me that children as young as 5 were able to keep the secret,
You know, we may have been 5 or 10 or even 14, but we're all little old men. You know, it's difficult to understand the situation in a different context. And the 5-year-olds you know now, you say, God, they'd never keep that secret, right? But we weren't the 5-year-old you know now. You know, so there is that. There was another aspect to your question I'm trying to remember.
The
it now.
monitors. Did
Yeah,
they know?
no, the answer is no. The teachers did not know, which of course helped keeping the secret. Paul Joris knew because he became my godfather, right? The only person who really knew was Madame Taquet, and her husband, of course, who did that. The priest, I really have my doubts. The sisters, well, one of them, you know where I'm going with that one. Okay, my wife knows everything. Gentlemen, remember that. She ran the infirmary. She took care of us, you know, when we were ill or something, using that god-awful stuff in our throats. But she never went any place without her thermometer. And if we looked askance, or if we looked like we were breathing hard, or anything, temperature. That's where we lost our last vestiges of dignity, because she had never heard of the word oral. 1, 2, 3, 4. Got it? Good. So my question now, not then, of course, was, you know, if she looked, she knew I was Jewish. I'd like to think she was a saintly woman who averted her eyes. So she didn't know. But if she did know, she certainly kept her mouth shut. Saintly either way, right?
Right.
So, wonderful woman, wonderful person. One thing we have not mentioned, and it may come up later when I'm not with you anymore, is, you know, this business of becoming an altar boy, learning a new religion. I mean, brand new, and never knew any, didn't even know the word Catholic. And the fact that everything we did was in Latin. I had to learn the Latin, not necessarily the meaning, but certainly how to say it. All the prayers, all the things that I had to do in serving Mass, you know, Latin, 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 Latin. So that was kind of interesting. Do I have a minute?
Sure.
More? We had to go to mass every morning, and we had to take communion. I didn't know any of those words at the time. When you're sitting there in church with all the other boys, and the priest is explaining something, and he holds up the host, right? Everybody know what I'm talking about? Okay. And he says, "This is the body of God," and then that man eats it. If you are Catholic, you've never thought of that, right? You never thought of him as eating it, of course. But he puts it in his mouth, right? I mean, that was something. And then when we had to go and kneel, and you did it to each one of us, no pun intended, but difficult to swallow. Okay? But the worst thing I remember of that day when he was explaining things was when he held up the chalice, and he said, "This is the blood of God." And then the man drank it. They take a 10-year-old who's never been subjected to anything like that. That's trauma. That is really traumatic. You grow up that way, it becomes second nature, right? And besides, you know exactly that he's drinking wine, But I didn't know any of that. And it sure looked like blood from where I knelt. So that's interesting. Also, how many of you are Catholic? Oh, wow! Hi, brothers and sisters. I say that no matter what we are, right? We're all brothers and sisters. But we're walking down the hall in a row, 2 by 2, and I asked the kid next to me, "Where are we going?" And he gives me that condescending look that one kid's give another kid when he thinks he's stupid. It's Thursday. I said, "Yeah, so what?" "Well, on va à la confesse, you French speakers. We're going to confession." I couldn't say, "What's that?" Now, you all know when you go to confession, you go into a confessional and you have privacy, and only the priest can hear you, right? If that had been so, my goose would have been cooked. Luckily, we didn't have any confessionals. The priest was sitting, Father Hardy was sitting on a chair at the end of the hall. We marched by and stopped, and the first kid went up, and when my turn came, I just regurgitated everything I'd heard. Apparently I did a good job. He didn't bat an eye. And I got my penance, and so forth and so on. And from that day on, and then about a week later, he made me his altar boy, so I must have done something right. I told you, the kid, I'm not talking about me, I'm talking about the kid. He was bright, he had guts, and he wanted to see his parents again. He really did. Yes?
The film says 90,000 Jewish people in Brussels or in Belgium?
90,000?
I think that's what
No. It said that on that day, well, I know the figure, I don't remember what it is, but in those 3 days, they arrested about 30,000 men.
Well, my question is, how many Jews were in Belgium, and then how many survived?
I don't know the answer to. No, I really don't. It's funny. Not funny, but I've never looked at that. The fact that they arrested 30,000 men, all of whom probably had at least a wife and a child or two, left a lot of people in the lurch. Oh, another thing linguistically. When André was speaking about not telling the mothers where she was sending the children, you understand why, of course, because if the Germans caught the mother or the father and made them talk, they couldn't tell them what they didn't know. And the Germans were very good at making people talk. But she said at the end of that sentence, and I want you to know that many of these mothers never saw their children again. Do you remember that statement? Well, the statement is true, of course, but the way she said it in French, what she really meant was the children survived, many of the mothers did not. You understand? Many of the children did never see their mother again, which meant, of course, the mothers never saw their children again, too. But of the children that were hidden, the 3,000 children that were hidden by this little group of teenagers, all survived. All came home, some to no home. I was lucky, at least I came home to my mother. You know? Jennifer, is that you? Yeah. Okay.
So
Yeah.
left to go back home, but it seems like there must be some sort of story there. How did you travel home and what were your experiences?
It's a wonderful question, Jennifer, and it's been asked I don't know how many times, and I cannot answer it because I see myself saying goodbye to the nuns and Madame Taquet and so forth, and then I'm on the street walking and I see my mother. And I have an absolute blank between the two. You know? And people have suggested hypnosis and so forth, and then my answer has always been, what for? Why? You know, I don't need to fill that blank. Maybe I forgot it for a reason. There was no money. I don't know. It's far away from the Ardennes to Brussels. I don't know how I traveled there, but I did, quite obviously. And thank you, Jennifer. I'm sorry that I can't answer it better, but that's the, you know, I've got an incredible memory for detail, and that part is just not there.
Are you still in touch with any of your former classmates at the school?
Oh, yes. Yes, indeed. I wouldn't say all of them, but a few. Like, for instance, David, who spoke, you know, they're the one who was 5 years old when he went in there. I didn't know him at the school, of course. You know, would a 10-year-old have anything to do with a 5-year-old? You know, would the 14-year-olds have had anything to do with me? No. You know, there was one of 3 groups. But I met him at the reunion, and something just worked out, and we're really fast friends. Best friends, if you will. You know, he comes to visit, I go to visit, we talk, and so forth and so on. Yeah.
How many of them live in the States?
Very few. So many of those children were Belgian born and just stayed home. You know, they were not all children of refugees. You know, I was. Did you understand when they explained about the school, how they got some of the Jewish children into these schools or what they were? Was that clear to you, or should I elucidate? You don't care, okay. Explain it? Okay. Belgium is a kingdom still today, so therefore it has an aristocracy. And during the very short war, just a few weeks that the war lasted for Belgium, the actual active war, a number of officers were killed and a number of officers were taken prisoner and sent to Germany, prison camps. The aristocracy under the leadership of the Princesse de Merode decided to do something for the privileged children of these officers, dead or prisoner, and to set up some schools all over the countryside where they would be safe from bombings and so forth. When these young people who were trying to take care of Jewish children, and I say young people without putting another label on them because they were both Jews and non-Jews, you know, who did this, and I call them late teenagers because they were all either very late teenagers or very early 20s. These were young people. They went to see the Princesse de Merode, and they said, which took a lot of guts right there, would you accept a few Jewish children among those privileged other children? And she said yes, but it's at the discretion of each principal of each school. And that's how it happened that Madame Taquet accepted 87 children out of 125. You know, incredible. You know, so there are saints, right? I mean, or whatever label you want to put on them. And there are miracles, right? I mean, the boys and the teachers standing there in the middle of this pitched battle and not one of us even getting a scratch. Wouldn't you call that a hand held over us somehow? I mean, there's no other explanation. I mean, I'm talking about bullets and explosions and mortar, you know, all the things. We were right in the thick of it. Nothing happened. Germans were killed. I don't know about GIs, I hope not, but, you know, it was a battle. So that was certainly a miracle. We didn't think about it much. The other miracle, which I'd like to mention to you, because you may get a kick out of it, was everything at the school was discussable. The teachers promoted, you know, lively interaction, and we learned so much from that. The one taboo point of discussion was the war. The war was not to be mentioned, ever. So when we went out there in October of 1944 into a battle, and these jeeps came in with these white stars, and we were told those are Americans, To us, that was a miracle, because we did not know that they'd been there since June, that they landed in Normandy, that they were making their way across. We thought, rightly so, that they just dropped from heaven. It's beautiful, isn't it?
Childhood innocence.
Yeah.
We can't.
How and when did you decide, if you did, to share this part of your history with your children?
Oh, as soon as they were able to, did you understand the question? How early or how soon did we decide to share these facts with our children? As soon as they were able to comprehend. You know, you didn't sit them down and say, no, you got to listen to this, but little by little, they were told everything. As a matter of fact, that brings me to the next point. When the film came out, David and Mark watched it in their own room, and they let their mother and me watch it on our own, because they figured, of course, rightly so, that somebody would be sniffling. And afterwards, David said, and you saw his picture, you know how young he was at the time, he said, you know, I knew the facts because you told us over the years, but now I understand the chronology. Pretty bright, my son. You know, that young man, that young David, is now an officer in the U.S. Navy, has a degree, is a nuclear engineer, and all these things. And one of the proudest moments of my life was at his commissioning, was handing him his sword. So as someone said, I forget who, a friend, come full circle, you know, from the victim to the protector. It's beautiful. And Mark is getting married in 2 months. So we're looking, David has 5 children, so we're grandchildren 5 times in spite of our youth. And we're looking forward to Mark and Catherine and their child or children. Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you.
An acquaintance of mine, also a survivor your age, had a similar story. And the thread of his story was luck. So
Oh, yes.
just lucky. Things just went their way. No
Yes.
explanation. Would you say that's...
I would totally, completely, absolutely agree that luck plays an enormous role. You know, running into Madame Extain at that Red Cross station after Papa was taken away, and she giving my mother a job, and then telling my mother to let me go and giving me the name, and running into Paul Joris, and one thing after the other. Oh, definitely, sir, I would say that a great deal of luck.
For those of you who would like to see the ultimate true story of luck, you might want to see the film Europa, Europa, which is just one significant experience of luck right after the other. Okay?
It's lucky that we're here, isn't it?
Yes. And we're lucky that we have you, Paul. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
If you'd like to buy Paul's book, it's here. Do your usual attendance sheets there.
The best thing I can wish all of you is